Welcome to our 60-second Chestnut Chat. I am your host, Denny Regulova, and I am the New England Regional Science Coordinator. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. As an attendee, we cannot see or hear you. Nobody can see or hear you. So you can go answer the door, you can leave the TV on, whatever, you can order pizza in the meantime. We will not hear you. If you want to ask any questions of our guest, please use the Q&A function instead of the chat. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A. It looks like a little text box with a question mark. And we will get to all of your questions at the end. If you want to chat with each other, you're welcome to use the actual chat for that. Eva or myself won't be able to see that. So feel free to have the sidebar conversations there. What else? Our moderators here are Cassie Stark. Cassie, can you remind us what your new title is again?
Director of Science Implementation.
There you go. Thank you. So welcome, Cassie. And Angus from the National Office. Angus, can you remind us what your new title is?
I'm the donor engagement officer. So
Awesome. Yeah. And Angus works very closely with chapters as well. So thank you both for joining us as our moderators. And if there are any quick questions that Angus or Cassie can answer in the meantime while we're presenting, they will do that. Last but not least, I want to give a special shout out to Russell Boyer. He has attended every single Chestnut Chat since we began this in 2022. So shout out to Russell. Thank you for being here again. We have finished our technical difficulties. Thank you for everyone for bearing with us. And let's begin. So I'd love to introduce Eva Butler. She is the current Maine Chapter Vice President. And in her tenure as Maine Chapter Vice President, Eva has done so much. It amazes me, and I am in awe. She has launched two incredible outreach programs that have gotten a lot of folks engaged. You've increased membership, and they're really innovative. And I hope that we can eventually spread those to other chapters as well. So today, Eva's going to talk to us about one of those programs called Chestnuts Across Maine. And I will turn it over to Eva to tell us all about the program. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you to talk about one of my favorite subjects. I come to you as a fairly newly retired professional scientist. So that is my background. But in my career, mostly in California, I came kind of from a place of science and into a place of social engineering, I think it's fair to call it. I got into trying to change the trajectory of our planet at the most local level that you can choose, like the town you live in. And from, starting a nonprofit called Sacramento Splash and staying with that for 20 years until I retired, I learned a lot about what works to make change and to do that at a very grassroots level. So with that, I would like to start this talk with a background image of this child drawing the roots of a tree. And I'll tell you why. There's going to be I figured I could use an ad that those people wouldn't mind if I put an ad on my talk. So, when people look at a tree, they tend to look at the part that is visible above the ground. We call that a tree. But you don't have to spend very much time in a forest to discover that most of the tree is under the ground. And that part is really important. In fact, there is more connection between that tree's roots and the rest of the world than between its crown and the rest of the world. I use this image because in my work with TACF, what I think I've discovered is that the really the quiet part of sharing chestnuts with others and working toward their restoration is the part that you don't really see and we don't really talk about. We use words like outreach and visibility, but the part of falling in love with the tree and wanting to do something for it happens at a really, I'll say, grassroots level. I think we should probably invent a term like tree roots level, because this is not a grass, and yet it's still as deeply connected as any grass ever was. And for those of us who know that we can't achieve the mission of restoring the American chestnut by ourselves, we know that we have to bring others into that fold. I've learned that you have to meet those people where they're at. I've learned that as compelling as the science is and as excited as the community scientists get about it, that is not the way to people's heart. The science has to be right, and we all know that facts matter, or at least they used to. But this part takes a different set of skills than being a scientist. I worked with a lot of scientists in my life, and I know that for many of us, they don't really have a sense of how this work happens beyond the lab or the field or the notebook. But it is just as complicated as any work that we do as scientists. We may not run into the people who do it well. We may not hear their stories and their tricks of the trade, how they're successful at moving an agenda without anyone knowing it's happening, with everyone thinking that they're the ones moving it. So it's not evident what it takes to accomplish these difficult goals. But in the same way that a tree is able to ground itself fully to the earth and its roots are able to connect with the living things around it and produce a tree that can stand, in this case of a chestnut, 100 feet tall in a strong wind and not fall over, that we know that the deep connection is at the grassroots level. So my talk is really going to reference roots as a theme, because really I just want to convey to folks that if you're not comfortable with how that deep community level connection happens, you don't have to understand how it gets done to support it. The people that do it can tell you what it is that they need to be more successful and how you can help. But trust that out in this big wide world that is the world of chestnuts, that there are people that can help us do this, and we need to reach out and bring them in to our community. I will just say at this point that one of the things that I've learned from my mentors is that whatever we do, we need to do it. Sorry, I got to get out of this. How do I see? Already my technical difficulties are showing. I have to advance this. There we go. That whatever we do to reach out to people, to bring them into the world of chestnuts, it has to meet the 5 basic needs, the fundamental needs of people to be fully connected with other people. And we need to consider these 5 things in everything we do. And that is that to be connected, people need to be seen, they need to be heard, they need to be valued, they need a way to contribute, and they need to belong. And I have found that as I'm about to take a step into uncharted land, I always run those by me and think, because we all know what that feels like to be embodied with those attributes. Maya Angelou's famous quote, probably botch it, is that, they may not remember what we said, but they will remember how we made them feel. And so the feeling, what we do to make people feel valued and like they belong, is really important. So we have a big, bold mission at the American Chestnut Foundation, and that is to return the iconic American chestnut to its native range. From that mission, a successful mission, we hope to achieve our vision of a robust eastern forest return to its splendor. For those of you who have worked in the field of chestnut restoration, you already know how big and vast that mission is. For those of you who don't, let me give you just an idea of kind of what we're dealing with. If you haven't heard of the chestnut blight or the American chestnut, it's because up until about 1900, they were just part of the landscape and a big part of the landscape in the whole of the eastern forests you can see in that map. In 1904, when the chestnut blight came in on Asian chestnuts, those chestnuts began to disappear. You can see in the map up in Maine that just appears to be, can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Yeah.
Seems to be a small population. That is about the northernmost population that was known around the turn of the century. Climate change has now made the state of Maine suitable habitat for chestnuts, probably most of that land, other than, bad soils. Things are changing. But from 1904, for the next 50 years, the blight progressed from around New York City north and south and to the west until there were very few standing chestnuts left. You can see a picture of what a canker looks like on a young chestnut tree over on the right. Let's see. Just move this out of the way. So the scale of the loss was enormous. It was really the first gigantic ecological disaster that we endured in the United States. And it left a lot of sadness. It left cultural devastation for Native American tribes that still persisted in those communities. In Appalachia particularly, the chestnut was a really significant part of their cash economy. And, when we think about poverty in Appalachia, we sometimes fail to recognize that people, were getting along until the Depression hit and chestnut blight took away one of their biggest cash crops and the way they would fatten up pigs for market, which was their other source of cash. Just to give you a sense of, if we talk about restoring the American chestnut to its native range, that would include all of the dark green there in the map, over 200 million acres, at least 400 billion trees. Those trees, 1 in 4 of the trees in the Appalachian forests in the early years was a chestnut. And there are folks that have postulated that density of chestnuts may actually have been the result of their careful tending over 13,000 years by the resident populations, the indigenous populations of the eastern U.S. So people were modifying that landscape to serve their needs, particularly their need for food. Chestnuts are a really nutritious crop. I was amused to see that in the early 1600s, about 20% of the trees on the island of Manhattan were chestnuts. And I kind of want to be the one to go to the new mayor and say, we have a plan to restore those chestnuts, and we're going to pretty much need to take over Manhattan. I'm looking forward to that conversation. But wouldn't that be cool to have chestnuts all over Manhattan again? So when you look at this mission to return these trees to their native range, there are 2 primary components. That is that we need to develop a chestnut that will not succumb to chestnut blight. Folks have been working at the American Chestnut Foundation for 42 years, and people that preceded the founding of TACF trying to find that disease tolerance. They've looked in the naturally occurring populations of chestnuts for evidence that some were managing to survive despite blight on their neighbors. To this day, we'll get calls from people that they're so excited to share the news that they think they've got the chestnut we need. They have a 50-year-old tree in their yard that their daddy planted, and it's still going strong. And it's kind of heartbreaking to be the one that has to say, from what we know of the genetics now, I can pretty much tell you that's not true, but I'd love to come and see your tree. And those folks are in love with these trees. And even though they have to stop believing it might be the solution to chestnut blight, I think those connections that we make with people who take the time to call or write to say, I've got a tree I want you to see, it's touching. And I think it's important. It is the way that we grow our roots out into the community. So that takes science, disease tolerance, science matters. I joined TACF about almost 5 years ago, right at the time that our founder, Eric Evans, who had spent 26 years of his life searching for a solution to this through back crossbreeding. I arrived on a board of people who had really just learned that what science had shown us is that we weren't going to get there that way. Thousands and thousands of trees, many orchards in Maine that they carefully tended, looking for evidence that one of those trees might persist despite the blight. And it wasn't a road that was going to lead us to the solution. In the process of doing that, and I just wanted to mention, there's something kind of heartbreaking when you see an old fellow who spent much of his adult life chasing this dream to realize he's not going to live to see it. And that's the thing about trees. I think it may be the base for our love of trees, is they're one of the few organisms that survive us, sometimes by hundreds of years. I think there's a legacy certainly in keeping them and planting them. This story goes that the best time to plant a tree is yesterday, the second best time is today. So the work that people have done all these years in Maine, from Maine all the way through Georgia, they didn't get what they wanted out of it. But what we did get was knowledge and tools and much, much greater understanding of how disease works, how disease tolerance works. And if you haven't heard, in Science Magazine, the issue that just came out has an article written by Jared, who's the scientist in charge of the new system of looking for tolerance. It's a kind of an amazing feat to have developed that, worked in that technology, and written a paper that was accepted by such a prestigious journal as Science. So I encourage you to take a look at it. So science, there's a lot of people working on it. We have many scientists in our Maine chapter on our board. Lots of people, we have accountants, we have lots of people that don't come from a science background at all. But what I haven't seen is that while you can have those conversations and get deep into the science with some of our members, most of our members aren't going to follow it that deeply. They are engaged and in love and wanting to share that affection for this tree with other people. And they, I believe, are the ones that are going to help us repopulate the landscapes that have been, from which chestnut trees have been obliterated. In the last 4 years, I have come to believe that the things we don't talk very much about, the grubby little details of how to do that landscape level restoration, I think that we are at the Maine chapter and we were starting to see our way toward that. TACF has a national office and 16 chapters in various states across the range of the chestnut. And in 2020, 205, a strategic plan was adopted, and it focused on 3 key areas in restoration. The first area is using advanced science to develop a resilient tree. And from my perspective, it seems to me that we are engaged in the best science with amazing scientists. Like with every nonprofit, making sure you have the funding to pursue that requires partnerships, and they can be different than the ones that you used to have and had relied on. And the last element, and I'd say this is kind of like the outreach part, is to broaden engagement through increased visibility. It's really important to have a flagship. It's really important to have a leader that's putting out kind of the summation of what TACF is, what the American Chestnut is. But the part about what you can do to help with that mission is really hard to orchestrate from a central location, because most of the grunt work of that happens on the ground. It's the groundwork where change happens, where plants get put in a hole in the ground. You cannot do that from an office in North Carolina for chapters spread throughout the Eastern Seaboard. You can help it, and I think that we are in the field are starting to get a better sense for how a national office can help us to pursue the things that are difficult for us to do ourselves. We're just a bunch of motley volunteers, and the skill set that I've seen in folks who have worked at TACF, and over the last 2.5 years, the outreach coordinators that were hired, I just want to give them mad props, because they and their abilities and their dedication to helping make our job easier in the field was felt. It's certainly in Maine, and I'm so appreciative that we had that support when we did. I don't think we would not be doing what we are right now in Maine had it not been for staff. I think we in the chapters have a vested interest in having and finding and supporting and maintaining quality staff. And I think that I have seen amazing capability and dedication from all the staff that I have worked with over the last 4 years. Could not have done it without them. So it seems almost impossible that at a national level, we are going to develop the grassroots that will make restoration happen on the ground. So we in the Maine chapter, I guess when the promise of the bioengineered D58 tree that we thought, was it now over 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that we thought that was the magic bullet. And we were just waiting for it to be approved, because then, we could get going on the restoration part and get trees in the ground. And everybody was so excited. And I have to admit that I was kind of overwhelmed with the sense of, oh my God, it happens so fast. Here's the tree. It's ready to be planted out there. As it turned out, it wasn't. But for us, it was like, where do we start? Oh my God, I wish we'd started 10 years ago. And our question was, how will we build the human infrastructure for chestnut restoration in Maine? The model hadn't been developed. I hadn't heard a lot of conversation about how it would happen. So we thought, well, let's try to see what we can do toward that end. So in the Maine chapter, we saw our goal is sort of kick-starting chestnut restoration in Maine, and how would we do that? I think that some of the challenges that we had faced with just managing the orchards that we managed as part of the backcross breeding program was that those orchards, there were several orchards, but they primarily were located in a part of Maine that is far from the denser populations of our membership. So what we would see when we had an event to take care of the orchards is that it would call upon the same people who lived, within about 40 minutes of that orchard, and kind of overwhelmed their volunteerism. But it also left all of these members and people who wanted to volunteer without something meaningful to do. When the D58 debacle happened, Mark McCullough, our chapter president, and I sat down in the local library in Rockland, Maine, and started thinking about, well, something that one of our elders had said. Um, Charlie had been the guy in our chapter who had gone around Maine looking for the remnant populations of living wild chestnuts. He'd spent years every summer doing that. And he was, I think, 90 or 92 when one day he said, I know we have this gene conservation orchards where we put the trees that we find in the wild and keep them growing because that's the only way to keep those genetics in flow. And he said, how come we take those trees and put them all in a gene conservation orchard? So if one of them gets the blight, within a few years, they all have it. And this light bulb went off for me, and I thought, that's how we'll get chestnuts across Maine. That's how we'll do our due diligence to preserve and conserve the genetics of Maine trees, but spread them out and get them nearer to the people who want to love them. Here in the heat map on the right, you can see some work that James Day, one of our members from Portland, did for us. We asked the question, where are our members? We know where our orchards are. We have orchards, mostly up in this area here. Some battered around, but our membership that wants to be engaged with us is all in the South, the cities of Portland, Lewiston, Auburn, the mid-coast. And this seemed like a way, like as the volunteer coordinator, I couldn't figure out how am I going to get these people mobilized if there's nothing for them to do where they live. We have, I'm sorry. How do I get back? Our gene conservation orchards were pretty much full. There wasn't room to put the new trees that we were finding thanks to Charlie. There wasn't any more place to put the trees that we continue to find, actually. So if the gene conservation orchards were full, what if we followed Charlie's idea and put those trees and spread them around, so if one of them got the blight, there'd be others in other places that would persist. Just so you know, the blight tends to not attack an American chestnut, until it gets to an age where its bark starts to fissure. When it's a smooth bark, there aren't a lot of entry points for the pathogen, but it reaches the age of 12 or so, those cracks start to open and the fungus can invade. That said, those trees can live for a decade or two, or sometimes even 3, and they'll start producing nuts by the age of about 7. So even though you plant a tree knowing that it will ultimately get blight, there is time to grow it and love it and get nuts from it and share those nuts. And when it dies, to cut it down and use the wood for something cool. We also, like many of the chapters of TACF and really, frankly, many organizations, we look around the room at our leadership and we see a lot of gray hair and bald heads and cranky joints. And we know that, this is a multi-generational mission. It doesn't end with us as we age and leave. We have an obligation to pass along our knowledge, our skills, to the next generation. To usually, right now, I'm looking at Eric Evans on the left there, and Eric's been our president for like 27 years or so. He has been in charge of our breeding program. He has the deep knowledge about pollination. He carries with him a wealth of information, as do guys like Al Faust in the upper right-hand corner, our president. I mean, so many venerable people who have carried this torch and learned so much, and transferring that skill and wisdom to the people who need to take over from them is a really critical issue for us and many other organizations. But I'm seeing progress in that at this point. We have been looking for young people to join us, and we've been finding ways to attract them. So, not to brag, but Maine has more mature wild chestnuts than any other state. And that with that comes an obligation. You can't just keep a wild chestnut because it will die from blight. So you need to collect its nuts, and you need to plant those nuts and keep those trees alive, and knowing that they will succumb to blight at some point. But if we always plant additional trees as the years go by, we can always keep a group of trees that is in that range where they're pretty blight resistant and they're producing nuts, so they can be our seed source. So, we said, well, why not grow them where people live? Well, in Maine, people live over a really big area, and most of it is very rural and forested. And I might be the volunteer coordinator, but I can tell you my resources are limited when it comes to trying to be the point of contact for all of the people in Maine we want to reach. So we came up with the idea of creating chestnut hubs. These are the more populated parts of Maine are kind of to the left, to the south and west, and pretty sparsely populated in those bigger circles that you see climbing up toward New Sweden there and the Canada border. That is Canada along that yellow border on the right. So I took our membership and looked at using GIS tricks that I'm not smart enough to use, but thank God others are. And we looked at a way to create a map where a potential volunteer, could say, look, anytime there's an activity going on, in the Farmington hub, I'd like to be on that call list to help. I'd also like to be on the call list for the Augusta hub because, I live right in between them, and these hubs are 25 miles in diameter. So anyone within this hub in less than, half an hour or so could reach the center or any point on that half of the circle. We're still implementing the way to put this into volunteer local so people can tell us up front, what lists they want to be on. But a big part of the reason for going to all this trouble is this. Let's say we have an orchard in the Heartland Hub, and we need some people to come help with the inoculation to test their tolerance to blight. The person that lives down, if I just do a cattle call to everybody, the people that live down here that are getting these invitations to come to this orchard are going to begin to feel like we don't know them. We don't really know where they live. It's asking a lot to come to any place in Maine and help out. Why don't you ever call me about something I could do near home? So this map is like the groundwork for engaging members across the state. We have a lot more work to do with it, but I foresee and already have started, we started to have each hub has a hub captain. So in the Bridgeton hub, it's Kim Colson. In the Sanford hub, it's Lee Sewell. In the Freeport hub, it's Jack Kennel. And so as people come into our fold, I can kind of gauge their level of commitment and availability. And at some point can reach out and go, hey, would you consider being the hub captain for the Ellsworth hub? What that would mean is that you would be the point person for any Chestnuts Across Maine projects that are in your hub zone. You might be in touch with the chestnut chasers looking for chestnuts there, that sort of thing. But it breaks the work down. That's the whole goal. Kind of zooming in. These are our bigger population centers. This is the 25-mile radius. Bethel is a smaller hub, and so that's just 20 minutes. And then the bigger ones up to the north and east, those are actually 30-mile diameters. we decided that we would kind of use the Bridgeton hub to try to model, how would we go about implementing Chestnuts Across Maine in a hub like Bridgeton? Our goals, are many. I'm going to quickly just kind of run through them. To put chestnuts across Maine, or basically plant chestnuts across Maine, we need to start with partnerships. Those partnerships are landowners who own land that's publicly accessible. We'll need to figure out what are the best locations for planting chestnuts. As we get closer to a restoration ready tree or trees, we want to know, this is our way to test whether the soils and conditions are right for those high value trees. Where should we start putting them? Obviously, where they're going to grow best. A major goal for Chestnuts Across Maine is to engage our members and other people who want to get involved with chestnuts. In addition to putting the trees out there and getting people to, hang out with them, probably the most important long-term goal, and I stress this because if we don't get to work and find a way to do this, it will mean that we planted a bunch of chestnuts and down the road they'll die and nobody will be there to grieve them. We need, for every planting of chestnuts, for there to be a person, eventually a group, eventually a community that knows how to plant chestnuts, where to plant them, how to take care of them, how to pollinate them, how to harvest nuts, how to select from within a grove which nuts they will keep, how to take those nuts and give them to other communities to plant. We're really trying to build kind of the store that will provide services for an ever expanding network of chestnuts across Maine plantings. In doing this, as I mentioned before, we would be conserving the genetics of Maine adapted trees, our big trees that produce nuts. We have to collect those nuts and get them in the ground. And then probably as importantly, picture a planting of chestnuts. We tell people to have to be a CAM site, you have to have at least 3 nuts and up to 10 in a year. But moving forward is the offer to add a few nuts, either every 2 or 3 years. So there's always some young trees that are blight resistant. And also to start incorporating into those plantings the trees that are coming out of the research pipeline with just incrementally improving levels of blight tolerance. As we put those out into these plantings and they cross-pollinate with our Maine wild trees, we believe that we will be putting those genes for blight tolerance into the grove over time. And as that resistance that we have in those new trees is spread, here's the thing, once we get the groves there and we get the resistance into their genome, guess what? We don't have to go plant them from then on, because the squirrels and the blue jays and all those other animals that were so good at moving chestnuts around for thousands of years will just go back to work and do what they're being paid to do. So I'm going to just kind of walk you through how our story unfolds in the next 15 minutes. Please feel free to ask questions. I kind of put the story together the way it never happens in real life, where it seems like we had a plan and we just did this all, perfectly unfolded. That is never how things work. We were willing to take chances and try things, make mistakes on a small scale and share your successes with the world. That's my motto. Fortunately for us, when we're trying to get the word out that chestnuts are cool, along came a 54-minute documentary care of the National TACF office and their amazing communications people. They made a movie that is, it's incredible. That was an incredible tool. I said that that's the kind of thing that a national hub can do, is to just make the things that we can't make to tell our story. So this is the Bridgeton Hub. On the stage on the left in the blue shirt is Kim Colson, who's the hub captain. She joined me along with some other folks that I pulled out of the landscape to create an outreach committee. It's our first like big operating committee in our board in a long time. And because she's local and she knows Bridgeton, this is Maine, these are small towns. She reached out to the Loon Echo Land Trust that she was sort of part of and asked, would you work with us as a partner to show this film to people around Bridgeton? We were able to go to the Magic Lantern movie theater in Bridgeton, which is, I won't even go there, unbelievably cool. Show our movie. You can see the audience for that movie there. And when we were done, 34 people signed up because they wanted to help with this mission. And I think my advice, the thing that I learned most is if people want to help, you need to invite them to help. You need to have a plan about what comes next and who's going to offer it and who's going to oversee it and make sure it happens and who's going to follow up to thank those people for showing up. This next thing we had to do was find willing partners, people who had lands with public access. In the state of Maine, I know we might be kind of special in this, but we have oodles of land trusts. This map, I know you can't read it, but suffice it to say there are more than 80 land trusts in the state of Maine and that are managing way over 2.5 million acres of land and conservation. The Maine Coast Heritage Trust is one of those land trusts, and it alone has over 80 preserves. So a lot of Maine has land and people that can help you use it. And bearing in mind that with land trusts in particular, they hold land, but one of the things that they need is they need reasons for people to visit it. They need highlights. They need things to showcase. So when you walk in and you say, we'd like to help you plant some chestnuts here for people to come and see and commune with, their eyes light up because they just got an item they can promote in their newsletter. They can bring people out to see them. They have a focus. So what I did not know going into this is that when you have partnerships where both parties benefit, they bring resources. Some of them bring tremendous resources, and what sounds like a lot of work to create these little tiny groves all over the state turns out to be doable because there are people out there willing to help who are organized and have, staff and skills. So among the possible partners, we need to work with them to figure out if they have parcels with suitable habitat. This is one of our other, the woman on the left, Lee Sewell, is on our outreach committee, and she's like a self-motivated energizer bunny. She has just gone all over and made connections among land trusts and other folks near where she lives in Ogunquit. We have projects here at the Great Works Regional Land Trust because of her. So what's suitable habitat? It's kind of easy. The first brush is that we say, well, the bioindicators for good habitat are white pines, oaks, and beech. Do you have those? You just need good drainage, and the trees are pretty forgiving. The next thing we had to do was to plan specific projects with specific partners and figure out who would be the people who would show up and do the work. One of my sites last year was the North Haven Community School, which is an island off the coast of Rockland, next to Vinyl Haven. And on that island, there is a land trust called the North Haven Conservation Partners. This is a small island, and the school folks know each other. It was so cool to take the ferry out to this island and see how these people had worked together to put this project together for their students. Definitely a highlight of my summer. So projects in Bridgeton that Kim Colson has overseen, we planted on the left, you see folks planting at the Sebago Lake State Park. There are two other sites where they've installed groves. And the cool thing about this work with the Luneco Land Trust and the state parks is that, Kim is there on the ground, and she has been instrumental in building this partnership with Luneco Land Trust that allows us to basically, they do outreach to their pretty big list of volunteers and members. So it expands our limited reach deeper into the community. And when we have an event like this, we might have some TACF members from the area who are finally getting a call to come and help, along with a whole host of volunteers that help out at the land trust near where they live. So folks come together to plant, or they don't come to plant, but there are trees that need to be taken care of. And that is where we kind of focus this nurturing of these, we'll call them chestnut restoration teams or CAM teams, but they are the ones that are given this task. And we say something like, this is all great to get these trees in the ground. They're going to need to be watered, every week in the summer. And if it gets as dry as it was here last year, even in year 2, we need to check on them and make sure that the browsers aren't eating them and that their cages are moving vertically as the trees grow. But mostly to recognize that you, as planters of these trees, have an obligation to teach others to do it. Bring other people out, bring school kids out, bring your friends out, have an event, highlight this project. And we have a new partnership with a graphic designer who's going to, we got a grant from the Viles Foundation that'll be sufficient to take a new sign design and print it so we can have signs at maybe all 20 of the projects we already have in the ground. And one more thing I wanted to say about the Maine Coast Heritage Trust, this project with these folks was on one of their new preserves. That land trust recognized quite a while ago that there were so many land trusts in the state of Maine that there needed to be some level of coordination. So we are lucky enough in our state to have a land trust network that advocates for the needs of land trusts. And that meant that we could go to that network and sort of start getting the word out to folks throughout the state that were part of that network, that there's a new project in town and we want them to play with us. We did projects in the city, right in Portland by the East Promenade, very, very visible site. It was a combination of partnerships between Cultivating Community, which is a food production nonprofit, and a public, what you call it, like an open orchard for public gleaning. I kind of love these pictures because this was my project. I could not believe the city let us put these in such a prominent place because, they're going to die eventually. So these folks showed up to plant, and, we had this woman on the right. She's walking her dog by. She goes, "Hey, what you doing?" We said, "Oh, we're planting chestnuts." She goes, "Can I help? Let me just put my dog home and I'll be right back." And sure enough, she showed up and starts digging. Well, if your problem is you need to find young people and pass this on to the next generation, it is the coolest thing to find out all you have to do is stand outside and do something that's unrecognizable as a normal act, and it'll find your people. I will say that even though the city guy said we could plant here, it turned out that some city people hadn't been asked or approved it. And they came back to the Mountjoy Orchard folks and Cultivating Community and said, "Oh yeah, it turns out you can't have those trees there." But here's the beauty of partnerships. The volunteers that work at that orchard and their leader, the guy on the right, bottom right, he said, "Don't worry, I'll get my volunteers on it." And a couple of weeks later, they had moved all those trees up to the orchard nearby. and kept them watered, and they're still alive today. And it didn't take an ounce of my effort or anyone else's on our part. So building these communities around chestnuts, essential work, joyful work, the fun that these people have had just coming together. I want you to notice this fellow here in the hat. And I want you to just witness with me what happens when you invite somebody to play with chestnuts. That man showed up for a planting with Kim's group right afterwards. After he came for a training for our chestnut chasers, where we were up in the woods, at the end of the training, we went up to show them a big tree in the woods. And he called me or wrote to me shortly after our training. He goes, I just reached out to the hiking group that I'm part of and made arrangements with the local guy here at the Girl Scout camp where we were working. And we're going to do a hike up to, I'd really like to see the chestnuts and show them to everybody. He goes, I just want you to know that was a really deeply meaningful experience to be there with those trees. This is the goal, is like take sequential things, have activities throughout the year where people can show up when they're available and get to do a multitude of things that bring them back together with their fellow chestnutters. We foresee, as these groves get going, that there'll be local harvest events at the trees. They can bring children out to do the harvesting. There can be a whole festival around chestnuts. And if you look at the historical picture, well, first with Native people, these trees were so essential to their stories, their songs, their dances, their practices, their food supply. That happened on this landscape for 13,000 years while they tended those chestnuts. It persisted when settlers came into those lands. What revolves around food. Just take Thanksgiving for an example. You can have a national holiday over it, but we envision a time when chestnuts are part of our cultures and cultures across the range of the chestnut. So there is a lot going on. We're trying to do 10 plantings a year in spreading them out across the state, so everybody ultimately is near a planting. But it's keeping track of those and keeping track of the data we would want to be able to review and assess. Turns out that's Kim Colson again, and her buddy, longtime buddy, she calls Kenster. Well, when you just reach out and ask somebody, would you like to help do this? I have a pretty good feel for people and who to ask. But what surprises me to this day is that you bring one person into that circle and they bring others. They bring relationships and resources. When Kim started to really deep think about keeping track of where are the trees, how are they doing, when are they getting watered, which of the methods of planting them seems to work best, she stopped everything and went and talked to her friend Kenster, who does that sort of thing. He does database development and just brilliant man. And they played together and they built what was first a spreadsheet for tracking, and then it became so big that they realized we needed a database. We really did think about using the TACF's Dentata base to do this and realized it just wasn't going to accomplish everything we needed. So they're still in the process of beta testing this now, but it's in database format. It will map the tree locations and their history. It'll also track, which volunteers are showing up to water. So Kim can actually have a rotation of people taking care of trees, and they use their field app to log that information. So she at the helm, or the hub captain at the helm can see, when the weather forecast, when water would be needed, and did somebody attend to that. Ultimately, because these are all on campsites are all on private land, this database can be used to make a map or directions so that when people flock to see the chestnuts nearest to them, it's easy to show them where they are. And I'll be done in about, I think, just about 10 minutes. So as we kind of picture this, you have little groves of chestnuts all over the place, and you have new blight tolerance that has been coming out of the research pipeline, and you want to get it to a bunch of places. Maybe seeds or trees aren't the only way to do it, but we could use the trees in these groves for purposeful pollination. We can train our chestnut restoration teams and tenders to, we teach volunteers how to pollinate all the time. It is a way to get pollen where we need to have it for kind of rapid generation of blight tolerant nuts. Like I said, we don't worry too much about how these are going to get spread beyond these small groves. We'll add a few trees every few years. People can start a new one, grow their orchard or their grove as big as they want. But, we've got squirrels and blue jays that we have to fight for the nuts, and they forget where they bury them. So we see this as a model for how to get chestnuts into the field and throughout their range by just giving these animals what they want to eat and bury and forget. Our milestones that we hope to reach by 2030, that we'd have 60 small chestnut groves established. There'd be a local team to tend each one, that Mainers could get to see wild chestnuts less than 40 minutes from home, and often far less than 40 minutes from home. And that's just by 2030. We had a goal of getting chestnuts planted close to schools. And I've pulled back on that a little bit because we've lost our, I was working on an educational program for middle schools with our outreach coordinators at the National TACF, and they were bringing a lot to that party. And now that they're gone, I kind of have to pull back on expectations for our school program. I've got a whole bunch of teachers wanting to start it and do it, but kind of limited time, and I can't really lean on resources at the national office for that anymore. Behind the scenes, so CAM is going on. This committee is orchestrating it. The partners are coming in. We've got waiting lists going out a year or two. The rest of this team is the support, I would say, like the support staff that keeps CAM emergent, is that every February we get together and pot up chestnuts at our annual potting party and potluck, because food is essential. And those trees get sold to individuals for fundraising and to get trees out to where they live. And these are also the trees that we deliver to the CAM partners, along with all the materials that they need to put the trees in the ground. We are out and about. We were at the Common Ground Fair this fall. We were at the Freiburg Fair the 2 falls before that. And we're just spreading the love. It is a way for us to get reports of, hey, I got a big chestnut tree near me. And once we determine it's not a horse chestnut, we get it into a logbook, and then that comes to me, and then it will eventually get to the chestnut chasers to go track that tree down. Again, we can talk science all we want, but you can't believe if you stand out on a dusty dirt road at a fair and you say, hey, have you ever had an American chestnut? People come and they linger and they smile and they laugh, and they are so happy to be part of this amazing mission. I will just say one thing. The fellow on the right, I called him to see if he'd be willing to, he became a chestnut chaser, went through the training this summer, and I called to say, hey, you live pretty near the Common Ground Fair. Would you like to come and help out? He's kind of a curmudgeon, and he goes, I don't know. I've had enough of people wandering around, not aimlessly at a fair. I don't think I really want to do that. But a couple of 3 weeks later goes, I'd be willing to come and try. He roasted chestnuts and passed them out for about 50 minutes and turned to me and said, I'd come do this anytime. This is fun. So fun in the sun. It's critical. Getting chestnuts out to people who want to plant them brings them to places all around Maine, and it makes them happy. I would say the single biggest request that we get from new members is I want to go see a big tree. They really want to hug a big tree, but that's their personal business. So they say, take me to a big tree. And we know they're out there because, Charlie's been out there mapping them, but we have not been out there to check on those trees in a long time. I don't have time to do personal tours and take people out. I don't have a gang, didn't have a gang of people who would do that. But we decided, Charlie's work, again, multi-generational commitment. It's our job to make sure that that data gets passed on and revisited and updated. And, that this love of chestnuts, I just have to say, if you had told me that a tree could bring together so many amazing people with so little effort, I would have thought you were smoking something, but it is absolutely true. And because of this need to, as you can see on the right-hand side, there are isolated trees that have grown big in Maine. We have a lot of them. We need people to go check on them. We need people to find new trees, and we need people who will take folks on a walk so they too can see and maybe even hug a big tree. So Chestnut Chasers launched this summer, and we trained about 25 people, and they are all waiting for me to get back to them so they can start chasing chestnuts again. So that's where we've been. We have a long road ahead, but it feels like a strong beginning because of what we feel back from those people we are on the ground with. This is working. We have faith, and we are excited about seeing where it goes, and if this model works, exporting it to other people who can benefit in the way we believe we will. So that is my talk. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Eva. That was amazing. I've heard you talk about this, and the way that you presented it here was, it's new every single time. I always learn something new. So thank you so much for your time and for joining us.
Very welcome. Very
You've
welcome.
had, yeah, you've had an amazing response from the crowd. People have been chatting in the chat. A lot of people, a handful of people had to hop off early, and they said that you did an amazing job. One person called you a force of nature, which I have to agree. So I wanted to pass that along. So
Those are the chills that I planted in the audience. I probably could even tell you who that is. Only
you'll
your
have to
friends will
reconnect
tell
with
you
them.
the truth.
Awesome. Well, I have a handful of very interesting questions from folks. Gary Jacob from my Mass Rhode Island chapter asked you to repeat the 5 values that
Yeah,
people need. You mentioned this in the beginning of your presentation. Could you go over that again?
I'm happy to. And that I've been mentored by a lot of people who have put time into teaching me things that would help me do better. And if anybody's interested, I'll just say that there are a lot of resources on a website called Connection First. That's the number one ST, not the word F, it starts with an F. So connectionfirst.org. These are teachings passed down from indigenous folks, Gilbert Walking Bull. I won't even go through the list, but people who have come from and or studied indigenous culture and are trying to lay down the stepping stones back to those things we've forgotten that are so essential for our health and well-being as individuals and communities. And again, I find these attributes of cultural connection to be valuable. So it is that everyone has a need to be seen, a need to be heard, a way to contribute, a to know they are valued for themselves and their contribution. And when those 4 things align, that develops this sense of belonging. And I believe that is what is very missing from our culture now. It's a countrywide problem, and we see the signs of it everywhere. But anyway, that those are just words, but I think you kind of get the gist. And there are folks that can fill you in on the hows of that. But yeah, thank you for the question. I find it really helpful in my own work.
Awesome, thank you. This isn't a question, but a note from Carrie James, who said, Medibemps Lake Land Trust is looking forward to expanding our orchard. All 40 of our trees that were planted by elementary students last year appear to be alive and well. Looking forward to partnering with TACF.
Yes, I actually have been in touch with the person who helped do that last year, and Cam, they are one of our campsites this year, and yeah, I need to just get on that. But just so you know, that Medibumps Land Trust, I think my understanding was that they had a lot of trees cut down, or maybe it was from a storm, I can't recall, but kind of the forest was leveled. And last year was incredibly dry here in the state of Maine, a terrible drought. They planted a bunch of trees that we didn't supply, and I think they lost one of 60 in an incredibly dry year in a kind of devastated forest setting. So yeah, that's the power of these partnerships. I'm just in awe of people who pull that stuff off.
That's awesome. I'm sure the sentiment is mutual. A lot of folks said that they learned a lot. Um, the next one is from Rob Drinkwater, who asked, how would I connect with the Ellsworth Hub? And I saw a couple of other people inquire about how they get connected to their local hub.
Yes, several of the hubs do not yet have a hub captain. This was not the way I thought I would find them, and it might not be that that's what you're volunteering for, but there's a pretty active chestnut thing going on around Ellsworth. We did some camp plantings. Mark McCullough did some camp plantings up in that area. So I think probably the thing to do is reach out to me, and let's just chat about it. If you're from there, maybe I don't know that community well, but this is how you find out. You starts with a conversation, and you never know where it'll go from there.
Awesome. So they should get in touch with
Just
you, the
yeah,
main.
just give me a call. Yep. Or
All right.
should say just the my it's I don't know if my screen is still up, but the web the email for me is Maine Chapter. That's ME like me chapter at tacf.org. That'll make it
Awesome.
to me, and I'd be happy to talk with you about it. Thanks.
There you go. I'm sure that your inbox will be full by the end of the
That's
day.
okay. A whole inbox.
Um,
That's love, man. That's what that is.
awesome. Somebody else, Alex Hurdle, asked, does Maine have a champion American chestnut tree?
Ah, um, I don't know if we call it that. I've only been at this for less than 5 years, so I am such a novice. But yes, we have some. We have some really big trees that people have heard about. I know several of those. Blight is amongst them now, even though some were quite isolated. Uh, and those are the kind of trees where big trees grow and where we can get permission to access them. Those are the places that I think the chestnut chasers will be taking folks out to. We haven't got that all worked out, but it turns out it's just happening organically. Some of our chestnut chasers did the training and just got out there and started finding trees and mapping them. And, I'd call up and say, hey, are you interested in going up to talk to the owner of that land? And they're like, I'm on it. And when we were out in the field and I said, hey, would anybody be willing to take other folks out to see this tree? And they just lit up. Like who doesn't want to share a tree? That's the easiest job in the world. Just make somebody's day.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's lovely. So I have a question for you, based on that, because you engage with a lot of volunteers from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of age groups, I'm sure. Um, have you noticed any interesting differences in how the younger generation feel and react to this work? Because, as you know, the older generations still often remember what it was like to have chestnut trees around. But the younger generations, myself included, that is not the ecological environment that we grew up in. So, what have you noticed?
Yeah, I think that's a really important observation. And, when I think about how large a thing like the chestnut as a species imprint it had on indigenous cultures. How many songs do you know that have chestnuts in them in all of America? And you think, oh, in all these years, only a couple of people have mentioned chestnuts. And, the poem that was written about an American chestnut, Longfellow's poem, I think it's a sign of a healthy culture and a healthy connection to others and the natural world and ourselves, frankly, when you are aware of another being and celebrate its existence. And you do that culturally with other people and recognize and have gratitude for that thing that is really a gift. When in other places and other situations where a change has happened, where something that was culturally really important fell away. And I'm thinking about like the playing of musical instruments in Ireland. What it took somebody to notice that if we don't get that back into our culture, we will lose it. I would say, everyone wants younger people to join their organizations and complains how hard it is. Um, they're busy. Um, they can't always be relied on, some, but when you find the ones who are meant to be with you, that bond develops rather fast. I would say my concern about, getting getting younger members on the board, getting a more diverse board, a younger board, all kind of revolves around what if you want something, you want someone to do something, you better figure out a way that solves a problem for them while it helps you. And that is kind of why I lean back on connection. Like, connection is so missing from our lives, but particularly for young people. There is so much isolation. When I spin it to a young person, I'm looking for example, I asked James Day one day, I said, if I said, geez, there's a tree we need to check on and it's far flung out in this woods, you are allowed to access it, but I don't have anybody to check and see if that tree is still healthy. I said, if I could give you the GPS coordinates, would you go check on it? And he and his partner said, oh, for sure. Because on a weekend, we like to go off and do a hike. We may as well do a hike for a purpose and find a tree. It'll give us a destination. And somebody said, oh, Eva, that's the same as geocaching. But instead of finding a box and a trinket, you find a tree that's going to make people celebrate. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess my short answer is you have to keep trying. We don't have a choice. We do have to keep in mind that our communities are more diverse and we need to represent, those people need to see themselves in us. They need to be seen and heard and recognized as valuable. And, we have to give them ways to contribute and forgive them when they are too busy or distracted or traumatized to participate. It's not a judgment, right? I think when it's right, but it means you have to keep trying and you just can't give up. There's enough cool stuff that happens in the process of trying that I find that just buoys me through, whatever disappointment that I might experience.
Awesome. Thank you. And so on that note, what kind of community impact have you noticed specifically in places like land trust? Because that seems to be the most common type of planting in CAM.
Yeah, I think it's too early to know. Um, what what I've noticed, so I went to the conference of land trusts I think it was April last year. I just showed up. We had a little booth. Nobody came to it because they were all talking to each other in the breaks. But I walked around. I talked to my pal at the Maine Coast Heritage Trust who was helping with that event because I think the event was sponsored by the Land Trust Network. And in a couple afternoons, in breaks, in minutes between talks, I was able to directly talk to several of the people who manage other preserves for that land trust, tell them what we were about, and get their contact information and a sense of how interested they might be in having a cam planting there. And, that's what's growing our list really fast. So, but I like the question, and I'm going to probably give it another year or so and ask that to our folks that are out working in those land trusts and make a point to find out, how is this working? And as I'm saying that, I think, well, God, Eva, that's what any responsible community organizer would have already done. So you could answer this question better.
You have to give it time. We'll just have to have you back on here. Next time
Well,
you'll talk about chestnut chasers.
I will, and that's going to be fun too. In the
Yeah.
meantime, if, anybody who wants to just chat about what they're doing or facing individually or as a chestnutter, um, we're trying to connect to people too.
Yeah, awesome. So what other activities do the hubs engage in? They plant trees and they monitor them, and it sounds like there's also some overlap with finding trees out in the wild. Is there anything else?
So that is really the thing we're working on right now is, and Kim is really good at reminding me that we need to be explicit about what's coming. And we can't do that across the whole, scaled project. But I think the reminder is like, let's do it. Let's do it in the Bridgeton Hub. Let's do it someplace so we can sort of beta test it, right? Just and be creative, like look around what already exists in your town. There's um, one of the lands that I've been interested in getting a camp planting on is the grounds, the campus of the old, it would have been over 100 years old had it not closed a decade or two ago, but it was the home for the feeble-minded, if you can believe that. And that campus has been resurrected by a foundation whose name is escaping me at the moment, and kind of turned into like a little economic engine for this pretty rural community. Right down the street is that fellow who was hugging that chestnut tree. Um, it's like he has said, oh, yes, I'm happy to have people come in my circular drive and check out that tree. So if you have an event at the Pinelands facility, yeah, let people know they can come down here and see this tree if they'd like. That's the kind of generosity that I'm talking about, right? It's like these people connect over the chestnut, and then all these opportunities happen to like bridge one thing to another. I couldn't even go into half the stories those slides reminded me of, but suffice it to say, I wouldn't lie to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And then last question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. This one is selfish. This one's for me. So I I have this experience very often when I'm talking to somebody new and they find out who I work for. And the reaction is always is often like, "Oh, I've heard that they're trying to bring that tree back. How's it going?" And I always laugh, and my go-to answer is that depends on if you're a pessimist or an optimist. So I'd love to ask you the same thing because you are doing pretty different work from the science side of things that we at National are involved in. You focus mostly on outreach, community engagement. So how do you think it's going?
Right. If you think about this as you're trying to build fertile soil for something that you might not plant for a while, in a kind of metaphorical sense, I have directly turned my MO, I guess, and I'm not ashamed to say it to people, is I'm in this for the community building because I see that we need to find ways to bring people together in common ground and purpose. That work has to be done through some mechanism. For me, it's the American chestnut, only because selfishly, the chestnut brings in my people. When I retired from my work in California and came back east, I was so deeply enmeshed in my community that when I finally made it back to the East Coast where I'm from, I just didn't know people. Like really just felt very isolated. And how can a woman that was so tapped in everybody now like not know who to go to talk to? And this, because I'm an ecologist, because this mission has appealed to me, it's probably since I was 20 years old, I I wouldn't have known had I not joined that I was going to find my people and they find each other. I watch it happen as we serve them chestnuts, right? It occurs to me that if we are unsuccessful in ever getting blight tolerant chestnuts, and we here in Maine go about our business, building bridges, making partnerships, helping people find one another, giving them fun things to do, celebrating the bounty of chestnut life around us. If we do all that and there's never the tree to plant, if my legacy is that, or the legacy that comes well beyond me, I think I'm okay with that, right? Like it's a job that needs to be done, and the chestnut is really helpful in doing it. What do we have to lose? Like, until we know there's really bad news, let's assume science takes time. You have to be patient with it. You have to do your due diligence. And this is not easy stuff. But, I look to our ancestors, I look to our mentors, I look to the people that are, graying and old in my own chapter. And I think these people have done this work meticulously for decades. I never hear them complain. And, that's pretty good company. So, keeping the faith, we're required to do that all the time these days. I think we can keep it for this project and this mission as well.
Amazing answer. Thank you, Eva. Well, we are almost at time. Thank you again for giving such a beautiful, moving presentation. You almost had me in tears at the beginning there. I also wanted to give a shout out to all of the folks that were in your presentation. Eric Evans, who's been doing this work for longer than I've been alive. Mark McCullough, your president. Kim Colson, and remind me of her friend's name.
Lee Sewell, and that's just such a short list, right? Like,
Lisa,
boy.
yeah, Al Faust.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you to everyone doing this amazing work. Thank you to everyone for joining. We still have over 100 participants in here. So if any of you have any follow-up questions for Eva, her email is still on the screen. Please email her and connect with the rest of us. And if you are not a member already, please join. And then last shout out to Russell Boyer. We will see you on the next Chestnut Chat. Thank you so much, Eva. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody for your attention. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.